Let me give you some good news. Something genuinely significant is happening in East Asia right now. And if you're not paying attention, you're missing out on one of the most important geopolitical shifts of the decade. Japan and South Korea, two countries that have spent the better part of a century nursing historical grudges, are actually getting their act together. And over in Beijing, where the Chinese Communist Party brass sits, they're absolutely livid about it. This isn't your typical diplomatic theater. This is about hard power, trade routes, semiconductor supply chains, and the kind of strategic alignment that keeps authoritarian regimes up at night. So let's talk about what's actually going on here. For decades, Japan and South Korea had a relationship that quite frankly made no sense from a strategic standpoint. Both are vibrant democracies, both have massive export driven economies, both face the exact same threats: an aggressive China and an unhinged North Korea. And yet, they couldn't stop fighting about history textbooks and comfort women memorials and rocks in the ocean that nobody actually cares about except as symbols. But something changed in 2023. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol basically decided that enough was enough. He took enormous political heat at home to propose a solution to the forced labor dispute. You know, the one involving Korean workers during World War II. Instead of demanding Japanese companies directly compensate victims, Seoul proposed a Korean foundation that would handle it. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio met him halfway with expressions of remorse and economic cooperation. It wasn't perfect, and it did piss off activists on both sides, absolutely. But here's the thing about leadership: sometimes you have to make unpopular decisions because the alternative is strategic suicide. Since then, we've seen intelligence sharing agreements, coordinated responses to North Korean missile launches, joint military exercises that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago, and this big one: deepening cooperation on semiconductors and critical supply chains. 76% of Japanese now support promoting relations with South Korea, the highest in history. In Korea, multiple 2025 surveys show record high favorability towards Japan, especially among the youth. 79% support economic cooperation, 74% support political and diplomatic cooperation, and 70% support security cooperation, all of which are rising. In both countries, the majority of the population views the other with favorable opinion for the first time in history. Let me paint you a picture of China's worst nightmare: a fully integrated, US-backed alliance structure stretching from the Japanese archipelago down through South Korea, probably eventually pulling in Taiwan, the Philippines, and Australia. That's not just containment, that's a democratic capitalist wall running right along China's eastern seaboard. The numbers here are staggering. Japan's GDP sits at around 4.5 trillion. South Korea's is about 1.7 trillion. Combined, you're looking at about 6 trillion in economic power. And if you include Taiwan in this emerging trio, it rises to about 7 trillion. And that's not even counting their technological capabilities. These aren't just rich countries, they're innovation powerhouses. South Korea dominates memory and chip displays. Japan leads in materials equipment and precision manufacturing. And Taiwan, as you know, is the center of semiconductor production. When Japan and South Korea cooperate on technology, they create redundancies and alternatives to Chinese manufacturing that didn't exist before. Samsung and SK Hynix can work with Japanese material suppliers to build semiconductor supply chains that deliberately exclude China. That's not theoretical, it's already happening. And Beijing knows it. Chinese foreign ministry statements have been increasingly shrill about what they call bloc confrontation and Cold War mentality. In translation, they're very scared. Here's where it gets interesting from a capitalist perspective. The global semiconductor industry is essentially a massive, fragile Jenga tower, and three countries hold most of the important pieces: Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. China desperately wants in on this game. They've poured over 150 billion into semiconductor development through their big fund initiatives, but they keep running into a problem. They're behind. The gap is widening. When the US implemented export controls on advanced chip-making equipment in October 2022, and then tightened them further in 2023, they didn't do it alone. Japan and the Netherlands joined in, restricting sales of critical lithography equipment. South Korea quietly complied by limiting Samsung and SK Hynix's ability to expand in China. This is economic warfare, and it's devastatingly effective. China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, SMIC, is stuck making chips that are generations behind TSMC and Samsung. They recently claimed a breakthrough on 7 nanometer chips, but even if true, that's technology Taiwan and South Korea mastered years ago. When Japan and South Korea coordinate on export controls, technology sharing, and supply chain diversification, they're not just protecting their own industries, they're actively degrading China's ability to achieve technological independence. From a strategic standpoint, this is checkmate level stuff. Let's talk hard security for a minute. The trilateral relationship between the US, Japan, and South Korea has been formalized in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. The Camp David summit in August 2023 wasn't just a photo op. It established institutional mechanisms for regular cooperation. We're now seeing annual multi-domain exercises, real-time missile warning data sharing, and coordinated defense industrial cooperation. Japan is rearming. Their defense budget is heading towards 2% of GDP, which for the world's third largest economy means serious money. We're talking about counter-strike capabilities, longer-range missiles, and actual power projection. South Korea, meanwhile, is becoming a major arms exporter. They're selling K2 tanks to Poland, artillery systems across Europe, and fighter jets to multiple countries. Their defense industry is booming precisely because they make NATO-compatible equipment that isn't Chinese or Russian. When you combine Japanese technology and manufacturing precision with South Korean production capacity and American coordination, you're creating a defense industrial base that China simply cannot match. Beijing's military modernization is impressive, sure, but it's happening in isolation. They're building capabilities designed to fight alone. Japan and South Korea are building interoperable systems designed to fight together with the United States against China. The strategic implications are profound. China's A2AD, anti-access area denial, strategy in the East China Sea and Taiwan Strait depends on overwhelming logical superiority. But if Japanese and Korean forces can cooperate seamlessly together, sharing intelligence and coordinating strikes, the calculus changes entirely. From a pure capitalist perspective, what we're watching is the market doing what the market does best, adapting to risk. Companies hate uncertainty, and they really hate authoritarian governments that might nationalize their assets or impose arbitrary restrictions. Japan-Korea trade hit record levels in 2023, surpassing 80 billion. Bilateral investment is surging. Korean companies are building more facilities in Japan. Japanese firms are expanding in Korea. This isn't charity, it's risk diversification away from China. The China Plus One strategy, where companies maintain Chinese operations but build redundancy elsewhere, is evolving into China Plus Two, or even China Exit altogether. For some sectors, Vietnam, India, and Mexico are beneficiaries, but so are Japan and South Korea, especially for high-value manufacturing. Tourism between the countries has exploded post-COVID. Cultural exchange is booming. Korean pop culture is huge in Japan now, and Japanese culture continues to fascinate Koreans. Those soft power connections matter because they create constituencies in both countries who benefit from good relations and will lobby to maintain them. Here's the delicious irony. China's own behavior is the greatest accelerant for Japan-Korea cooperation. Every time Beijing throws a tantrum about historical issues, every time they impose arbitrary trade restrictions, every time they fly bombers near Japanese or Korean airspace, they remind Tokyo and Seoul exactly why they need each other. China tried economic coercion against South Korea over the THAAD missile defense system deployment in 2016 to 2017. They devastated Korean tourism and retail. And what did it accomplish? It showed Seoul that economic dependence on China is a strategic vulnerability. The lesson learned wasn't don't deploy missile defense, it was diversify away from China at all costs. Beijing's wolf warrior diplomacy has been a catastrophic own goal. They've managed to alienate almost every neighbor simultaneously, which is actually quite an achievement when you think about it. This isn't to say Japan-Korea relations are now perfect forever. History doesn't work like that. Domestic politics in both countries can still derail things. A single conversation statement or symbolic gesture could reignite tensions. But the structural incentives for cooperation are stronger than they've ever been. The threat from China is real and growing. The economic benefits of integration are tangible. The technological synergies are obvious. An American commitment to maintaining this alliance structure appears bipartisan and durable. From a China hawk perspective, this is exactly what containment should look like in the 21st century. Not armies facing off in raw combats, but democratic, capitalist nations choosing to cooperate because it makes strategic and economic sense, market forces and security imperatives aligned. China's authoritarian model requires dominance over its periphery. It requires neighbors who are weak, divided, and dependent. What's happening now is the exact opposite. Neighbors are strong, united, and building alternatives. And that's why Beijing is furious, because they are losing and they know it.